At a certain point, something confusing happens. The system starts listening. Emails get replies. Meetings are arranged. Assessments begin. And yet, life doesn't get safer. It doesn't get calmer. In some ways, it gets harder. This catches a lot of people off guard. Because the assumption is simple. Once you're heard, the worst part should be over. But that isn't what many people experience. Not because harm suddenly appears at this stage, but because the harm that already exists changes shape. Long before the system listens, people are already under strain. They've been explaining themselves repeatedly. They've been navigating uncertainty. They've been living with unmet needs, fatigue, and fear. That pressure doesn't disappear once attention arrives. It compounds. What changes here is not whether harm exists, it's how it deepens and how it's processed. Before I continue, a brief introduction. What you're watching here is not live or recorded footage. This is a digital stand-in for Jacko, generated to look and sound like him, and used to speak from his perspective. This channel covers subjects Jacko finds worth thinking about: philosophy, psychology, disability, systems, finance, and how people actually live inside them. The reason this channel exists in this form is practical rather than conceptual. Jacko lives with a physical disability that makes recording unpredictable. Some days filming or speaking is straightforward. Other days it's exhausting, impractical, or simply not possible, including periods of illness or hospital stays. Using a digital version of himself allows these ideas to be shared consistently rather than remaining private or unfinished. The aim isn't performance or polish, but continuity and clarity. If one or more of the topics explored here are useful or interesting to you, you're welcome to follow along. When a system begins to engage with someone, it doesn't do so in the way a person would. It doesn't respond to context, history, or cumulative strain. It responds with procedure, rules, processes, thresholds, handovers. A life that has already been under pressure now has to be translated again, often to multiple people, often without shared memory, often without a clear endpoint. Needs become categories. Distress becomes risk. Complex situations are broken into fragments. This isn't done maliciously. It's how large systems operate. They don't hold stories, they process inputs. And this is where an additional layer of difficulty begins to form. Because the emotional cost of being inside the system starts to rise. People become overwhelmed. They repeat themselves. They lose patience, they show frustration. Sometimes they raise their voice. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they speak bluntly or incoherently. At this point, many people are unstable. Not because they were inherently so, but because prolonged fear, uncertainty, and pressure have destabilized them. Anger in this context is often how fear sounds once it's been carried for too long. From the system's point of view, though, this behavior is often encountered without context. Workers see a single interaction. They don't see the months or years that led up to it. They don't see how many doors have already been knocked on. They don't see how much energy has already been spent just getting to that point. So reactions are interpreted in isolation. Urgency is read as pressure. Persistence is read as difficulty. Distress is read as volatility. At the same time, people working within the system are aware of something else. They know that exaggeration exists. They know that people are often forced to amplify their needs in order to be taken seriously. Quiet explanations stall. Measured requests go unanswered. Intensity is what moves things forward. So a defensive posture develops. Claims are treated cautiously, needs are taken with skepticism, budgets are guarded, thresholds are enforced, and in that environment, even clearly articulated needs become distorted, not because they weren't explained properly, but because they arrived through a channel already saturated with fear, urgency, and exaggeration. This creates a breakdown in understanding on both sides. People feel unheard even when they are being clear. Workers feel pressured even when they are trying to help. And both sides leave the interaction confused. This isn't a failure of intelligence or empathy. It's what happens when a system teaches people to perform distress in order to survive, and then penalizes them for doing so. At this stage, engagement itself becomes draining, not because attention is new, but because the effort required to stay regulated keeps increasing. The system is now present in a person's life, but without providing stability, without providing resolution, without providing a sense of safety. This is where many people realize something unsettling. Not that they aren't being heard, but that being heard doesn't stop the strain. Over time, another pattern becomes clear. The harm is not just in what happens, it's in how long things take and how unpredictably they move. Once someone is inside the system, waiting becomes the dominant experience. But this isn't simply waiting for a place on a list, it's waiting caused by fragmentation. People change roles, staff go on leave, workers are sick, teams are reorganized, cases are handed over, or not handed over at all. Sometimes communication stops entirely. Weeks pass, months pass, eventually contact resumes. There may be an explanation, there may not. From the system's point of view, these gaps are ordinary. From the point of view of the person living inside the case, they create instability. Momentum is lost. Each pause breaks continuity. And because no single delay looks serious on its own, nothing ever fully settles. This is part of what makes the experience so destabilising. The system is tightly regulated and highly procedural. People working within it are under pressure. They are dealing with distress. They are constrained by rules they didn't design. They are often trying to avoid blame in an environment where accountability is unclear. So responsibility moves sideways. Cases are referred on. Issues are triaged elsewhere. Decisions are deferred. Each step makes sense locally. But globally, the person waiting experiences only stalling. And this waiting is not empty time. Life still has to continue. People cope as best they can. They switch off from the problem because that's the only way to function day to day. They try to forget about it for a while. Then the process resumes, not as resolution but as continuation. The same issues return, the same uncertainty, the same lack of conclusion. Psychologically, it lands with full force, because nothing was actually resolved during the pause, only deferred. Over months and years, this has a cumulative effect. Not dramatic, not sudden, but erosive. Confidence narrows, energy declines, life becomes smaller. People stop expecting clarity. They lower their expectations. They adjust downward instead of being supported out of instability. Families and advocates experience the same pattern. They attend meetings, they follow up unanswered messages, they wait, and they too feel the strain, which makes something important clear. This is not about who is speaking. It's not about articulation. It's not about being heard. Even when legitimacy is granted, the structure itself continues to generate stress, because it stretches time. fragments responsibility, and rarely concludes. This is how harm persists, not through outright refusal, but through prolonged exposure to uncertainty. A system that listens without resolving still harms. A system that engages without stabilizing still erodes. Most people sense this early on. What takes time is not realizing something is wrong. It's accepting that the instability isn't temporary. People want to believe the system will eventually make sense, that the delays are exceptional, that things will settle once the right step is reached. Letting go of that belief is often the hardest part. Not because it takes years to notice what's happening, but because it takes time to accept that this is how the system operates. That's all for this one. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, you can follow along. Thanks for listening.